Lanchester Sporting 40 Torpedo Tourer 1915. One of the greatest names in the history of the automobile, Frederick Lanchester began his career as an engineer at the Ford Gas Engine Co. of Saltley, near Birmingham, where he rose to become its works manager and chief designer. He patented a pendulum inertia governor while there, and would go on to file a further 425 patents in the course of a remarkably inventive life. With his younger brother George taking his place as works manager, Frederick began experimenting with small gasoline engines. He began work on what would be the UK's first four-wheeled petrol car of entirely native design in 1895, producing a tiny handful of prototypes, and in December 1899 the Lanchester Engine Company Limited was formed to manufacture motor cars. During 1906 cars were built, all retained for the company's own use, with deliveries to paying customers commencing in 1901. The first production Lanchester was powered by a horizontally opposed twin-cylinder engine of 4.0 liters, which drove via 3-speed up a cyclic gearbox and worm-drive rear axle. Larger twins were introduced, but by 1904 the general expectation was that engines of this size should have 4 cylinders, and it was while Frederick was designing such a car that his company went bust. The firm was reorganized as the Lanchester Motor Company Limited and duly introduced its first 4-cylinder model, a 2-liter rated at 20 horsepower, towards the end of 1904. Despite the engine now being vertical and at the front, Lanchester's established bonnetless look was maintained by mounting the power unit between the driver and front passenger. All production Lanchesters would follow this layout up to 1914. Unusually, one lever operated the clutch, gears, and main brake. In 1906 a 6-cylinder 3.7-liter model based on the existing 4 was introduced, which was followed by larger models of both engine types. By this time George Lanchester had become increasingly disillusioned with the company that bore his name, and George began to take on more of the design and engineering responsibilities. With bonneted cars now established as the norm, the bluff-fronted Lanchesters were looking increasingly old-fashioned in appearance, and in 1913, at the director's instructions, the first conventional design was introduced, the Sporting 40, which was the first Lanchester designed by George. Representing a quantum leap in style, this new type of Lanchester was powered by a 5-liter side-valve 6 that was carried beneath a lengthy bonnet. The result was one of the most stylish sports cars of its era and a worthy rival for Rolls-Royce's Silver Ghost. Only a handful had been completed when the outbreak of WWI saw Lanchester's factory redirected onto munitions and aero engine manufacture. This car is the only survivor. After the war the Sporting 40 was replaced in 1919 by a similar-looking, but completely different, 40-horsepower design. Lanchester made only 6 of this model and this example was retained by the factory as the company's publicity car. It was sold initially to an owner in Wales and then went to Australia. It is now the only known survivor. This car was the subject of a series of 6 articles in the VCC Gazette number 294, copy available, written by the late owner, Graham Pilmore Bedford, who restored it between 1998 and circa 2004. The Lanchester is now owned by his family. Graham Pilmore Bedford was an enthusiastic and active VCC member, and in the 1970s was the Lanchester Owners Club registrar and very friendly with Francis Houghton's Tott, the former VCC president and Lanchester Authority. Graham first heard about this car in South Australia in 1974. The Australian owner wanted to get the car running. He had found it with the engine and front part of the chassis powering a generator, while the front suspension and front axle were being used for a horse-drawn buggy. The car was missing its gearbox and the Australian did not get around to starting the project. Graham purchased the car in 1997 and brought it back to the UK, and by 1998 he had started the project. The coachwork is an exact replica of the original factory body, the ash frame being made by Graham to the correct specification from drawings and then skinned in aluminium to a high standard by a company in Devon. A casting of the gearbox casing was made from exact drawings, while the internals were more easily obtained as they match those of a 38 horsepower car. The original wheels came with the purchase, as did the chassis, in 2 parts, steering column, some gearbox linkages and control pedals. The Lanchester has an Oster-type rear passenger screen and overall is a very imposing car with its lovely polished aluminium body and pale blue wings and chassis. Other lovely details of a car rivaling a Rolls-Royce or Napier for quality include side-mounted spares on either side, Lucas King of the Road headlamps, Verdun side lamps to the front wings, a full complement of instruments, and very nice blue leather interior trim and blue-grey carpets. After completion, the Lanchester returned to the road not long after 2004 for a rally in Wales. It also took part in some VCC Say section rallies as well as the VCC Best of West Kent annual rally, which was organised in part by Graham. The car also participated in a rally in France when Graham reached his 80th birthday. The family are Lanchester enthusiasts and the car shares a motor house with other examples of the marque. For the last decade the Lanchester has belonged to Graham Pilmer Bedford's son, Jeremy, who drove it during that period on the Best of West Kent rally and the event in France when his father turned 80.